When I first moved into the dorms, I thought I had landed in a dream. The hallways smelled faintly of new carpet. The walls were painted in those bright, optimistic shades of cream and pale yellow that universities love, and every door had a whiteboard on it for doodles or messages. For the first week, the whole building buzzed with a sort of nervous excitement that only happens when hundreds of young people are suddenly dropped into the same place, away from their parents, free for the first time. People were laughing in the hallways at midnight. Doors were open so strangers could wander in and introduce themselves, and pizza boxes stacked up by the recycling bins like trophies of late-night adventures. It didn't take me long to notice my neighbor, Sarah. She had the room right next to mine, and from day one, she made her presence known. Not because she was mean or pushy, she actually had this loud, easygoing personality that drew people to her, but because she literally made herself known by sound. If there was a party on the floor, it was in Sarah's room. If someone was singing loudly off-key with a hairbrush microphone, it was Sarah. And if the bass of some pop anthem rattled the thin walls at 2 in the morning, well, that was Sarah too. At first, I didn't really mind. I told myself it was part of the experience. After all, wasn't this what people meant when they said college life? A little chaos, a little noise, a little less sleep. I figured I could roll with it. My roommate, Marcus, seemed to agree. He was laid back to a fault, the type of guy who could fall asleep with a marching band outside his window. The first few times Sarah's music shook our walls, he just chuckled, rolled over, and snored through it. But me? I wasn't built like that. I needed my sleep. I wasn't one of those geniuses who could skate by with 3 hours of rest and still ace their exams. If I want to keep my GPA afloat, I had to study hard, and to study hard, I had to sleep. The first couple of weeks went by in a blur of classes, late-night pizza runs, and figuring out how to do laundry without turning everything pink. Sarah's music became a kind of background noise. Some nights it was classic rock, other nights rap, and sometimes the latest pop songs played on repeat until I was humming them against my will. I told myself it was fine, that I'd adjust, that maybe she'd even calm down eventually. But then came the first big test of the semester. It was for my economics class, a course I had been struggling with from the very beginning. The professor had this way of making graphs and formulas feel like ancient hieroglyphs. I had spent the week before the exam hunched over my textbook, scribbling notes, drilling practice questions until my eyes burned. I told Marcus that I needed one good night's sleep before the test, and thankfully he was on board. He even promised to put in earbuds if he wanted to watch YouTube in bed. I went to bed early, feeling cautiously optimistic. And then, around midnight, it started. The wall between my room and Sarah's throbbed with the unmistakable beat of some overproduced party anthem. The kind with lyrics you can't really remember 5 minutes later, but a bass line you feel in your bones. I groaned, pulled the pillow over my head, and tried to ignore it. 15 minutes passed, then 30. The music didn't fade, it grew louder. I could hear Sarah's laughter, bright and unrestrained, through the wall. She wasn't just playing music, she was hosting. At 12:45, I gave up pretending. I swung my legs out of bed, pulled on a hoodie, and stomped into the hallway. The door to Sarah's room was wide open. A handful of people were sprawled inside, lounging on beanbags, perched on the edge of her bed, nodding their heads in rhythm. The room itself looked like a college catalog photo shoot gone wrong. String lights tangled across the ceiling, posters of bands and movies plastered everywhere, a half-empty pizza box sitting on her desk. And there was Sarah at the center of it all, grinning like she owned the place. I knocked on the door frame, trying to keep my voice even. "Hey, Sarah, could you maybe turn the music down a little? I've got an early exam tomorrow." She turned toward me, her grin widening. Her friends glanced at me like I was some kind of alien who had wandered into the wrong habitat. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd understand, maybe she'd even apologize. Instead, She smirked. Sure thing. And then she turned back to her speaker and cranked the volume higher. The bass thudded so hard the floor seemed to shake under my feet. Her friends howled with laughter, and Sarah raised her eyebrows at me like she had just scored a point in some invisible game. My stomach burned with anger, but I didn't trust myself to say anything. If I opened my mouth, I might say something I regret. So I clenched my jaw, turned on my heel, and went back to my room. Marcus was half asleep when I came back in. He squinted at me through the dim light. She didn't turn it down, did she? Nope. He groaned and shoved a pillow over his head. Within minutes, he was out again. But me? I lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled thump of Sarah's party until nearly 3 in the morning. By the time my alarm rang at 7, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My head pounded, my eyes burned, and when I walked into my exam, the words on the page swam like they were written underwater. I did my best, but my brain felt sluggish, my thoughts heavy. When I turned in the test, I told myself I'd let it go. It was just one bad night, one bad exam. No point in making it a bigger deal than it was. But the thing was, Sarah didn't stop. Night after night, her room was a miniature concert hall. Sometimes she was alone, sometimes she had friends over, but always the music was loud, always it was late, and always it was right when I needed sleep the most. Other people complained, too. I heard whispers in the hallway, saw other students rolling their eyes when Sarah walked past. But nobody did anything. Maybe they were too intimidated. Maybe they didn't want the hassle. Maybe they figured it was easier to just endure. I tried. I really did. I bought a pair of cheap foam earplugs from the campus store, but they didn't block much. I tried noise-canceling headphones, but they were uncomfortable to sleep in. I even tried blasting white noise from my phone, but all it did was blend with Sarah's music into some weird, maddening symphony. It wasn't just the noise that got to me, it was the attitude. Every time someone asked her to turn it down, she laughed. She thought it was funny. She thought we were uptight. Relax, it's college, she'd say, like that was some magic phrase that excused everything. The more she said it, the more it crawled under my skin. And then came the night before my second big exam. This time, I wasn't just tired. I was desperate. I waited until midnight, praying she'd quiet down on her own, but of course she didn't. The music swelled, voices laughed, and my frustration boiled over. I marched to her door and knocked harder than I meant to. When she opened it, I forced my voice to stay polite. "Sarah, please, just for tonight, could you turn it down? I have a really important exam tomorrow morning." Her expression was cool, almost amused. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sure," she said again, with that same infuriating smirk. And then, as if to punctuate it, she reached over and twisted the volume even louder. Her friends burst out laughing. Something inside me snapped. I walked back to my room without another word. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and stared at the ceiling. My heart pounded with fury, my mind racing too fast to let me rest. I knew I wouldn't sleep, not with the music still booming through the walls. But somewhere in that sleepless haze, an idea began to form. If Sarah loved her late-night concerts so much, maybe it was time for her to see how it felt on the other end of things. And unlike her, I didn't need an audience to enjoy it. The morning after that sleepless night, I walked into my exam in a fog. My head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. Every question seemed harder than it should have been, every line of text blurry. I pushed through as best I could, scribbling down half-coherent answers. But when I turned in the paper, I knew it hadn't gone well. On the walk back to my dorm, exhaustion weighed on me like lead. My frustration with Sarah had grown into something else, a simmering determination. If she could sabotage my nights without a shred of guilt, then why should I keep playing nice? By the time I reached my room, the plan had taken shape. Sarah hated mornings. Everyone on the floor knew it. If you passed her in the hall before noon, she'd shuffle by in sweatpants with her hood pulled over her head, eyes half shut. muttering something incoherent. She never showed up to breakfast in the dining hall. Morning classes? Forget it. She scheduled them as late as possible. Her natural habitat was nighttime, and that was her weakness. So I dubbed my Bluetooth speaker out of my drawer. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, portable one I had gotten as a birthday gift. But it was loud enough, and more importantly, I could place it right against the thin wall we shared. The next morning, I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. sharp. When it went off, I rolled out of bed groggy but determined. I pulled up a playlist I had thrown together the night before. The cheesiest, peppiest bubblegum pop from the early 2000s. Boy bands. One-hit wonders. Songs so upbeat they were practically weaponized. I placed the speaker against the wall, pressed play, and cranked the volume. The first notes of an overly saccharine boy band ballad blasted through the wall. The hall, which had been silent a moment before, now pulsed with forced cheer. Marcus groaned from his bed. "Dude," he mumbled, pulling his blanket over his head. "What are you doing?" "Making a point," I said. For the rest of the week, I kept it up. Every morning, without fail, my alarm went off, and my cheerful playlist came alive. Sometimes it was just me and Marcus enduring it. Though to his credit, he never complained again once I explained why I was doing it. Other mornings, people down the hall would poke their heads out, confused at first, then laughing when they realized what was happening. Word spread quickly. Sarah, the queen of late-night noise, was getting a taste of her own medicine. By the end of the week, she was a shadow of her usual self. She didn't host parties. She didn't blast music. She barely left her room except for class. When I did see her, she looked bleary-eyed, sipping giant iced coffees as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. And then, just like that, the late-night concert stopped. No announcement, no apology, no grand acknowledgement. But the silence was deafening. The first night, I realized it was truly over. I lay in bed listening to nothing. No bass rattling the walls. No shrieks of laughter bleeding through the door. Just quiet. Golden, perfect quiet. I smiled in the dark, pulled the blanket tighter, and drifted off to sleep. From that point on, Sarah and I coexisted in a kind of truce. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. We nodded each other in the hall, exchanged polite hellos, but the power dynamic had shifted. She knew I wasn't someone she could just laugh off. Every so often, I caught her glancing at me with that same smirk she had the night she cranked up her music in my face. But it was different now. Less smug, more like she was acknowledging the game we had played. She never admitted defeat, but she didn't have to. The silence said it all. And me? I got my sleep. My grades steadied. My mood improved. And for the first time all semester, I felt like I had a little control over my life again. Looking back, I know it was petty. I know there were probably more mature ways to handle it. Complaining to the RA, filing noise complaints, something official. But honestly, nothing would have been as satisfying as those mornings watching Sarah stumble out of her room, undone by the same kind of noise she had once inflicted on everyone else. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about balance, about proving that if she was going to dish it out, she had to be ready to take it too. And once she did, she finally understood.